The wind swept low across the Nevada plains, dragging with it the dust of forgotten trails and the scent of something ancient and wild. A faint groan broke through the morning silence. A man lying motionless at the base of a steep ravine, clothes torn, blood seeping through his flannel shirt. His left leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and one eye swollen nearly shut. His chest rose in shallow, pained breaths. From a distance, he looked like a discarded bundle of rags, one the desert might swallow whole without remorse. His name was Luke Mercer, 48 years old, once a respected horse trainer, now a man on the edge of being no one at all. The betrayal hadn't come all at once, but in quiet slices, missed calls from friends, dwindling contracts, a marriage that faded like morning fog. Then last night, the last slice, a horse deal gone bad. Real bad. Luke remembered bits, the argument under the barn's dim lights, the sharp pain behind his head, the sneering face of Bart Kincaid as he ordered his men to make it look like an accident. He'd worked horses for Kincaid for months, believing the man's ranch was legitimate. It wasn't, and Luke had seen too much. Now here he was, discarded like a broken tool in a dry gulch far off any marked trail. The pain was unbearable, his mind fogged from the beating, but even through it all, one name drifted in his thoughts: Shadow. The horse. Shadow was no ordinary Mustang. Tall, coal-black, with a pale streak along his mane that caught moonlight like frost. A survivor of the wild, broken in by Luke not through force, but understanding. They'd learned to move as one man and beast. It was the one partnership left that hadn't crumbled under the weight of his life. And now, if Luke had any hope at all, it was pinned on that horse. Luke's lips cracked open, barely forming the name. Shadow. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, merciless in its heat. Vultures circled once overhead, curious, but cautious. Luke drifted in and out, haunted by flickering memories. His daughter Emma brushing Shadow's coat when she was little, her laugh like wind chimes, now silent for years. The quiet goodbye she'd whispered the day she left for college, shutting the door on more than just a room. The silence was broken by a distant snort. Then hooves. Slow, deliberate. Luke couldn't lift his head, but he felt it. Ground vibrations, steady and sure. Then a soft muzzle nudged his side. Shadow stood over him, ears pinned slightly, nostrils flaring. He nudged Luke again, harder this time, a grunt escaping his throat, as if urging him to move. "You came," Luke murmured, though the words were barely audible. Shadow lowered his head, brushing his cheek against Luke's face, the way he did when nervous. Luke blinked tears away, not from pain, but the sheer gravity of it. This horse, left untethered miles away, had tracked him. Somehow he'd known. Luke gritted his teeth, reached for Shadow's bridle. Not that the Mustang wore one, but the gesture mattered. Shadow knelt slightly, almost bowing, pressing his flank low enough for Luke to try. Agony burst in Luke's side as he attempted to shift, vision going black for a second. "I can't," he whispered. But Shadow didn't budge. He stayed there, patient, unmoving, as if saying, "Try again." With a guttural cry, Luke clawed his way up, dragging his battered form over the Mustang's back. Blood ran from his brow into his eye. His leg dangled uselessly. But somehow he was up. Shadow rose with a grunt and began to walk. Slow at first, then with more purpose. Not toward the ranch, not toward danger, but east, where Luke's old cabin stood beyond the ridge. The journey blurred. Luke held on with one arm and slipped in and out of consciousness. Every now and then, he felt Shadow shift beneath him, adjusting his gait to keep the balance. It wasn't grace, it was grit. Twilight bathed the horizon by the time they reached the tree-line. The cabin loomed ahead, weathered but intact. Shadow stopped short, pawing the ground. Luke managed a whistle, sharp and low. From behind the door came a flurry of movement. A second later, it swung open. "Cassie." She froze in the doorway, her eyes going wide. 37, sharp as ever despite the lines that had crept into her face since she'd last seen Luke. She hadn't expected him. Not today. Not like this. "Luke," she breathed. He gave a weak smile, then slumped forward. Cassie rushed to catch him before he slid off completely, her hand stained instantly with blood. "Oh my God." What happened? Luke, stay with me. He blinked, voice faint. Kincaid left me for dead. Cassie's jaw tightened. She glanced at the horse, then back to Luke. He didn't count on your partner. That night, Luke drifted in and out of fevered sleep on the cabin's couch while Cassie cleaned his wounds and splinted his leg. Shadow paced outside, neighing now and then. Once, Cassie opened the door just to touch his nose and whisper, "You brought him back. I don't know how, but you did." When dawn broke, Luke stirred to the smell of coffee and wood smoke. Pain still throbbed deep in his bones, but it was dulled now by something else, presence. Life. Cassie was at the table, eyes puffy from lack of sleep, but focused. She glanced up, speaking softly. "You're lucky to be alive. He almost killed you." Luke nodded, each movement slow. "Yeah, but Shadow didn't let him finish the job." Cassie studied him for a moment, then reached into the drawer and tossed a burner phone onto the table. "You need to make a choice. You rest, heal, and disappear. Or you finish what he started." Luke's eyes darkened. "He thinks I'm dead. That's your advantage." Outside, Shadow snorted. Luke turned toward the window, watching the horse graze, silhouetted by rising sun. "I'm not done yet," he said, and for the first time in years, he meant it. The fire crackled softly in the stone hearth as dawn stretched its light through the cabin's warped window panes. Luke sat upright on the couch, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and old tobacco. The pain in his leg hadn't vanished, but it no longer screamed. It whispered, constant and sharp. Every breath reminded him he was still broken, still vulnerable. Yet the quiet strength in his chest, awakened by Shadow's return and Cassie's care, gave him something stronger than pain purpose. Cassie moved around the kitchen, pouring coffee into 2 chipped mugs. Her movements were precise, almost rehearsed, like someone who had spent years preparing for moments of crisis and learned how to move without panic. She slid 1 mug across the table toward Luke, without speaking. He reached for it, hand trembling slightly. "You should still be dead," she said after a beat. "I know, but you're not." "No." Cassie sat across from him, folding her arms. "How long were you out there?" "Almost a full day, I think. Maybe more." He stared into the steam rising from the cup. "Long enough to know I wasn't getting out of there unless someone came looking." Her voice dropped lower, but no one did. Not a soul. Except him. Cassie leaned back, her expression unreadable. "I always said that horse was smarter than most people." Luke let a faint smile tug at the corner of his mouth, but it didn't last. "Kincaid thinks I'm dead, which means I've got a chance, 1 shot, to do something before he finds out otherwise." Cassie tilted her head. "You planning to run straight into the lion's den on a bad leg?" "No." Luke set the mug down. "I'm planning to think smarter than I have in years. But first, I need answers. Proof." Cassie stood and walked toward a small desk tucked beside the window. She opened a drawer and pulled out a worn leather folder, the corners curled and fraying. "I was going to send this to you. Then I heard you'd stopped training. Vanished. Figured you didn't want any part of it anymore." Luke took the folder and opened it. Inside were photographs, grainy, taken from a distance. Kincaid with men Luke didn't recognize. Trucks loaded with crates. A ledger copied by hand with numbers and symbols Luke immediately understood. Horses weren't the only thing being smuggled through the ranch. "This is how he paid for the property," Cassie said. "Not with breeding contracts. Not with livestock sales. That place was a front." Luke scanned the names. Some he remembered. One, in particular, made his breath itch. A local deputy. Someone he'd shaken hands with. Trusted. He snapped the folder shut. "I need to get to town. Quietly. This is enough to stir something, but I'll need to push the right buttons. You go limping into town, and Kincaid'll know before you take your second step." Cassie walked to the window, looked out at Shadow. "You're going to need to use the old ridge trail. Cuts around the main road, but it's rough, narrow. Most don't even remember it's there." Luke's eyes followed hers. Shadow stood alert, ears pricked toward the trees, like he sensed something stirring in the woods beyond. That horse had carried him through death's door and back, without hesitation. He wasn't just muscle. He was instinct, Memory, loyalty made flesh. I'll leave tonight, Luke said. After sundown. Less chance of being seen. Cassie turned back to him. You can't ride that far like this. I can ride. If I have to crawl onto his back again, I'll do it. Her mouth set into a tight line. Then I'm going with you. No, his tone was firm, but not unkind. You've already done more than enough. Cassie stepped forward, eyes sharp. I've got skin in this too. Kincaid nearly killed you, Luke. You think he's going to stop if he finds out you're alive? You're going to need someone watching your back. He didn't answer right away. The years they'd spent apart had frayed a lot, but there was still a thread, thin, but strong enough to hold. He remembered when they used to chase wild horses together in the valleys below, remembered the way she laughed when she beat him to the ridge. She hadn't laughed like that in a long time. All right, he said finally, but we move quiet. No lights, no noise. And if something feels off, we turn back. No hero moves. Cassie nodded once. That evening, after darkness swallowed the last of the sun, they saddled Shadow. Luke gritted his teeth and hauled himself up, aided by Cassie's shoulder and a rope rigged to the porch post. His breaths came in sharp bursts as he settled onto the horse's back, but he held steady. Cassie mounted her smaller chestnut mare and pulled her hat low. The woods welcomed them with silence, broken only by the rhythmic thud of hooves on soft dirt. The ridge trail was as narrow as she'd said, sometimes no wider than the horses themselves, winding between ancient pine trunks and over outcroppings that dropped into unseen darkness. They rode in single file, eyes scanning, ears tuned to the rustle of leaves. Halfway through the trail, Luke whispered, "Do you think he knew I was getting close to the truth?" Cassie didn't look back. "I think he knew you were getting too honest." "That's worse." They fell silent again. At one point, a distant coyote howled, long and low. Shadow didn't flinch. He moved with certainty, always a half step ahead, as though leading not just through the woods, but through something deeper, like memory or fate. By the time they reached the hill overlooking the town, a pale moon lit the rooftops. The place looked peaceful, ordinary, but Luke saw through it now. He saw the shadows clinging to corners, the unmarked trucks, the lights on in the sheriff's office long past midnight. There were truths buried in that town, and Kincaid wasn't the only one protecting them. Cassie drew her horse alongside Shadow. "You still want to do this?" Luke looked down at the streets, then at the folder in his coat. "I have to." And though the night seemed still, somewhere in the trees behind them, a branch snapped. Not from the wind. They weren't alone. Cassie's hand moved to the rifle strapped to her saddle. Luke whispered, "We make it to the old barn on the west edge. Lie low till morning. Then we move." Cassie gave a single nod. They nudged the horses forward, vanishing into the dark as the wind picked up again, carrying with it the cold scent of something about to break. By the time the first rays of morning brushed the roofs of the sleepy town, Luke and Cassie had taken shelter in the crumbling west barn, hidden beneath a tarp of old canvas and silence. The horses were tethered just inside, concealed behind rotted hay bales and broken boards. The barn creaked with the weight of its years, but it stood strong, forgotten, yet dependable. Much like Luke himself, he watched from a narrow gap in the wall as the town came to life. Trucks rumbled down the gravel road. People walked with coffee cups and purpose, unaware, or perhaps willfully ignorant, of what lay beneath the surface of their quiet lives. He spotted the sheriff, the same man whose name had been in the ledger Cassie gave him, leaning against his cruiser and laughing with a man in a black windbreaker. That man, Luke recognized, was Kincaid's enforcer. He had a crooked nose and a permanent sneer, and wherever he was, trouble followed like a shadow. Cassie crouched beside Luke, her expression tight. "They're watching everything," she whispered. "We can't go through the front door." Luke nodded. "The library. There's a back entrance. Leah used to leave it open for me when I came in after closing." Cassie blinked. "Leah Bennett? She still works there." "Last I heard. If anyone's got reason to hate what Kincaid's done to this place, it's her. They ran her brother off the land. She'll help. She might. But she'll want to know why I came back." Cassie stood slowly. "Then you'd better be ready to tell her the truth." By noon, the town square had emptied into silence again. Lunch hour. The sheriff was gone, and the windbreaker man had disappeared into a corner diner. Luke adjusted his coat, his injured leg wrapped tight beneath his jeans. Every step throbbed, but he walked anyway. Cassie followed, head down, her hat pulled low. They moved like ghosts, crossing alleys, ducking through gates, until the tall red brick building loomed ahead. Luke knocked twice on the rear door. Nothing. He knocked again, softer. A creak answered from within. Then a sliver of light appeared as the door opened just enough for a wary eye to peer through. "Luke," the voice said, uncertain and sharp. "Leah, it's me. Please." The door opened wider. Leah had aged, but her eyes were the same, burnished amber and brimming with quiet fire. Her auburn hair was pinned back loosely, and a cardigan clung to her shoulders like a uniform of resistance. "You're supposed to be dead." "I was almost. But Shadow found me." Leah looked over his shoulder, spotting Cassie, and then beyond them. "Get in, before someone sees." Inside, the library smelled of paper and dust, and something gentler, like cinnamon or old memories. Luke leaned against a table as Leah locked the door. "What do you want?" she asked, her arms crossed tight. Luke pulled the leather folder from inside his coat and laid it on the table. "Proof. Names. Ledgers. Kincaid's been running more than livestock. I need someone to help me get this to the right people." Leah opened the folder, flipped through a few pages, her face growing pale. "I've seen some of these names in town records. I always wondered why things didn't add up." "Because they were never supposed to," Luke said. "This whole town's been rigged. Quietly. Efficiently. But if we get this in front of a federal marshal, someone outside, he can't bury it." "And how do you plan to get out of here alive to do that?" Cassie stepped forward. "That's where you come in." Leah's mouth twitched. "You really think I'm going to risk everything for this?" "You already have," Luke said softly. "Every day you stayed here and kept your eyes open." There was silence. Then Leah closed the folder and nodded. "I know a guy in Laramie," she said. "He's DEA. Used to be state. Owes me a favor. Can he get here fast?" "No, but if we can get the documents to him, he can pull the strings." Luke exhaled. "Then we ride tonight. Quiet again. Through the southern pass. I'll type up a summary of the contents," Leah said. "Make a second copy, in case you're stopped." Cassie paced near the window. "We'll need a distraction. Something big enough to keep Kincaid's people busy while we ride out." Luke's gaze drifted to the church bell tower across the square. "You still know how to climb?" he asked Cassie. She grinned faintly. "You planning to ring the town awake?" "Only for a minute. Just long enough to make them look the wrong way." By dusk, plans were set. Leah worked quickly, copying and organizing, while Cassie slipped into the shadows. The sky burned with the last light of day when Luke mounted Shadow again, grimacing as the movement jarred his ribs. He clutched the folder close to his chest. Every step the horse took was a beat of time stolen from danger. Then the bell rang. Once, twice, 3 times. It echoed down the streets like a ghost calling for judgment. Lights flicked on. Shouts rang out. Someone ran from the diner toward the square. Cassie was nowhere in sight, but that was the plan. She'd vanish into rooftops and trees, just like old times. Luke nudged Shadow forward. Leah stood at the gate, watching. "I'll call him," she said, "if you make it out." "We'll make it." The ride through the southern pass was darker this time. The moon was late in rising, and the air thick with anticipation. Luke rode low, using every inch of his old knowledge, where the trail dipped, where loose stones waited to betray a hoof. Halfway through the pass, a figure emerged. Horse, rider, blocking the trail. Kincaid. He sat atop a tall roan, his coat unbuttoned, hand resting on the butt of a revolver. "Well," he drawled, "you do know how to make an exit." Luke didn't speak. Shadow shifted beneath him, ears pinned. "You should have stayed dead," Kincaid said. "You'd have been a legend. Now you're just a problem." "I've been called worse." "I imagine you have." Kincaid tilted his head. "That folder in your coat. It's not going to make it far." Luke adjusted his reins. Then you'd better come take it. The standoff lasted seconds, but something moved in the brush behind Kincaid, a bird maybe, or something more. He turned to glance. That's when Luke kicked Shadow forward. The horse surged like lightning, and Luke ducked low. A shot rang out. Missed. Then another. But Shadow was already past. Trees swallowed them. Luke didn't look back. He didn't have to. He had what he needed, and he had one more ride left in him. The air in Laramie was sharper, cleaner, as if the mountains filtered away everything corrupt. Luke felt it in his lungs the moment he crossed into the valley. Freedom, brittle and unfamiliar. He rode with caution, the saddle worn beneath him, Shadow's gait steady and sure. The folder was still pressed to his chest beneath his coat, warm from his body. He hadn't slept more than an hour in the last day, but his mind was razor-sharp, fixed on the next step, finding Leah's contact. Cassie met him at the outskirts of town, stepping out from behind an old grain silo. Her eyes darted to the folder, then to his leg. "You're limping worse." He nodded. "It's nothing I can't ride through." "You say that, but you've been pale since yesterday. You lose too much blood, Luke, and none of this will matter." "It'll matter," he said, "because if I die before handing this over, at least I made them chase me." Cassie didn't respond. She looked toward the water tower on the hill, her voice dropping low. "Leah's contact is waiting at the freight yard. Third car on the north siding. Name's Corwin. Said he'd have federal credentials." "And you trust that?" "I trust Leah." That was good enough. They tethered the horses beneath a corrugated shelter and walked the rest of the way. Laramie was smaller than Luke remembered, less a town, more a cluster of stubborn buildings that refused to give way to time. At the yard, the wind carried the scent of rust and oil. Freight cars loomed like slumbering beasts, their sides tagged with graffiti and soot. They found the third car just as Leah had described, its door slightly ajar. A man sat inside, crouched on a crate with a thick folder in his lap. He looked up as they approached, standing slowly. He wore a federal windbreaker, the badge clipped to his belt, but Luke's instincts didn't trust uniforms anymore. "You Corwin?" Luke asked. The man nodded. "You Luke Garrison?" Luke said nothing, just pulled the folder from inside his coat and handed it over. Corwin opened it and whistled low. "Damn, this is more than I expected. You've got receipts, signatures, shipping records, hell, even bank transfers." "I don't care what you do with it," Luke said. "Just burn them down. Every name in there." Corwin's eyes scanned the first few pages, with the calm of a man trained to be unshaken, but his mouth tightened slightly at the third page. "Some of these people are high up. This goes beyond one county." Luke took a slow breath. "Then burn more than one." Corwin snapped the folder shut. "All right, I'll make the call. But you two are ghosts after this. You disappear." Cassie stepped closer. "We didn't come for protection." "No," Corwin said, "but you'll need it anyway." They left the yard quietly, circling back toward the horses. Luke felt lighter, like something had been lifted off his back after years of pressure. But the feeling didn't last, because when they returned to the shelter, Shadow was gone. Only his lead rope remained, cut clean. Luke crouched and examined the dirt. Hoof prints. Deep. Scattered. Someone had taken the horse, and they hadn't tried to hide it. Cassie's breath hitched. "They followed us." "Maybe. Or maybe they were already here." Luke stood, jaw clenched. "They want to draw us out." Cassie scanned the horizon. "There's a fairground 3 miles east. Big arena, old rodeo spot. That's where I take a stolen horse if I wanted people to see." Luke turned without a word and began walking. Each step burned, but his resolve held steady. Cassie caught up beside him. "You know it's a trap." "They took my horse," he said flatly. "They made it personal." The sun was sinking low when the arena came into view. Rusted stands, broken fences, and a dirt field that once held cheers and dust. Now it held something colder. Men in coats. Trucks with covered plates. And in the middle, Shadow, tied to a post with blood on his flank. Kincaid stood at the edge of the ring, arms crossed. The enforcer from the diner flanked him, holding a rifle with the laziness of someone who'd used it too many times before. Luke didn't stop at the fence. He limped forward, hands empty, voice steady. You made a mistake. Kincaid's smile was shallow. I made a statement. Cassie moved to Luke's side, her hand twitching near her belt. You're outnumbered, Kincaid said. You think a file of names is going to stop men like me? We've been doing this for decades. Luke's voice dropped. And you've been doing it wrong. Kincaid laughed. You want your horse? Trade me. The name of the contact you just met, where you gave the file. I'll let you ride out. Luke stared at him. That's your offer. Take it or die here. Luke nodded slowly, then turned and walked toward Shadow. Not fast, not aggressive, just deliberate. The rifleman raised his weapon, but Kincaid held out a hand. Let him see what's about to end. Luke reached Shadow's side. The horse was trembling, but alive. Luke untied the knot with one hand. Then he looked back. Cassie already had her pistol drawn. She didn't shout. She just moved, quick as a spark, clean as a cut. The rifleman fired. Missed. Luke vaulted onto Shadow's back, pain screaming through his leg. But adrenaline was louder. He gripped the reins, wheeled the horse hard. Cassie ducked behind a post, returning fire. Kincaid cursed, lunging for cover. The other men scattered. Shadow broke into a gallop, and Luke held on. The arena blurred behind him. Cassie sprinted after him, vaulting onto a second horse tied outside the ring. Together, they rode hard into the dying sun. They didn't stop until the trees swallowed them again. When they did, Luke slid from Shadow's back and sat hard against a rock. Cassie knelt beside him, breath ragged. You could have died, she said. I still might. But we gave them something they'll never forget. Luke nodded, staring into the distance. Now we see if it's enough. Cassie looked down the trail. What if it isn't? Then we go back, he said quietly, and we finish it ourselves. Far behind them, the wind carried faint sirens. Not from the town, from somewhere bigger. Federal. They had started the fire. Now all that remained was to see how far it burned.